You know, we hear terms like El Nino and La Nina thrown around in the news literally all the time, right? Usually they're accompanied by some pretty intense footage of severe droughts or just devastating floods. But what do they actually mean? How do these phenomena actually dictate whether farmers in India get their rain or whether fishing zones in South America thrive? Well, to truly understand these extreme global weather events, we first have to figure out what normal looks like. So in this explainer, we're going to decode the vast interconnected engine of our global weather system. Let's dive in. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll kick things off with a normal baseline. Then we'll look at the Walker cell cycle, examine the El Nino disruption, tackle the La Nina extreme, and finally, we'll unpack this looming super El Nino threat.
All right, part one, the normal climate baseline.
Okay, our journey starts right at the equator, where intense sun rays are just relentlessly heating the top layer of the Pacific Ocean. You can kind of think of it like a bucket of water sitting outside on a really hot summer day. That surface heats up incredibly fast under the sun, but the ocean water isn't equally warm all the way down. Beneath that warm surface layer, separated by a boundary we call the thermocline, sits this massive body of freezing cold water. And understanding the dynamic relationship between these two layers, that is absolutely crucial. It's the key to our entire global climate. Now, think about blowing across the surface of a cup of super hot tea to cool it down. As strong easterly trade winds blow continuously across the Pacific, they act exactly like your breath. They physically push that warm top layer of surface water away from the Americas, driving it continuously from east to west. So, as those powerful trade winds push the warm surface water westward, this massive, deep pool of warm water stacks up near Australia and Asia. And with the warm water swept away from the eastern Pacific, the freezing cold water from deep below is forced to rise up along the South American coast to replace it. This steady upwelling of cold water, that creates our perfect, normal baseline condition. Moving right along to part two, trade winds and the Walker cell. Okay, so that massive pool of warm water in the west heats the air directly above it, and this kicks off an incredible atmospheric loop known as the Walker cell. The warm ocean water heats the air, making it light so it rises, which leaves a low-pressure zone behind. Then it travels way up to the edge of our lower atmosphere, the troposphere, where it hits freezing conditions. As it cools, this air becomes incredibly heavy and sinks back down, crashing over the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal to create these immense, high-pressure zones. And here is where a simple rule of physics brings rain to millions. Winds always travel from high pressure to low pressure. Because the Tibetan Plateau is a massive low-pressure zone, it essentially acts like a giant vacuum. It sucks in that heavy, moisture-rich air from the high-pressure zone that just formed over the Arabian Sea. This sweeping movement creates the vital southwest monsoon, delivering the essential rains that India completely relies on. I mean, this single physical process literally dictates the food supply and survival for over 1 billion people. Part 3. El Niño, the monsoon disruption. But nature, as we know, is never perfectly static. When those strong trade winds suddenly begin to weaken, the entire system just flips. The heat shifts back to the east, trading those healthy monsoons in Asia for devastating floods in South America and severe, punishing droughts in India. Going back to our tea analogy, just like when you stop blowing on your tea and the warm liquid rushes back across the cup, weak winds cause that pooled warm ocean water to retreat eastward. This completely blocks the cold water upwelling near South America. It ruins vital fishing zones and dumps massive rain clouds right onto the Andes Mountains. But crucially, because the warm water left the west, the high-pressure zone over the Arabian Sea, it completely fails to form. And without that high pressure, there's no monsoon wind. India is literally starved of rain. The result is just terrible, punishing heat and devastating drought. Which brings us to part 4, La Niña, the extreme normal. So, if El Niño is a collapse of the system, La Niña is nature wildly overcorrecting. Everything we just saw in the normal baseline happens, but with a dangerous level of intensity. The trade winds don't just blow, they absolutely roar. The high and low pressure zones don't just form, they become hyper-intensified. Now, at first glance, La Niña brings rain, which sounds pretty great after a drought, right? Actually, scratch that. It's way too much of a good thing. Its excessive high pressure forces massive destructive clouds toward India and Australia. To put it into perspective for you, a severe La Niña can dump so much rain on land that it actually temporarily lowers global sea levels. It essentially trades those crippling droughts for violent floods and massive cloudbursts. The whole system is pushed far beyond what the landscape can safely handle. Finally, Part 5, the Super El Niño threat. Here's the scary part. We're no longer just dealing with natural fluctuations. Historically, we could expect an El Niño disruption on a somewhat predictable schedule, roughly every 5 to 6 years. The last historically typical event occurred around 2018 to 2019. But rapid climate change has basically broken this cycle. The ideal, predictable conditions in nature are disappearing, which is causing the frequency and severity of these massive events to vary wildly. The whole reason this cycle is breaking really comes down to a single number: 2 degrees Celsius. This is exactly why experts are now using the alarming term Super El Niño. We're not just talking about a slight warming here, it's a massive leap in oceanic temperature variation that changes the fundamental math of our weather systems. Let's look at the difference. Historically, a moderate El Niño caused a water temperature variation gap of just 0.5 to 1.0 degrees Celsius. But today's Super El Niño crosses a massive 2-degree threshold. In planetary terms, that extra degree is a catastrophic amount of energy. It triggers significantly more frequent, much more severe heat waves and a level of unpredictability that our global agricultural systems were simply never designed to handle.
So, as terms like Super El Niño become our new normal, it leaves us with a really urgent question to ponder. If the core engine of our global weather is fundamentally changing, how in the world will our agriculture, our infrastructure, and our societies adapt to survive these growing extremes?